The soft rain that night in Chicago wasn't unusual, but something about it felt heavier, like the sky knew her heart was tired. Madison Hart sat alone in her apartment, her bare feet tucked under a blanket, staring at the drawer in her dresser that she hadn't opened in months. Inside it was a ring. Not just any ring, the ring. A simple, elegant diamond in a thin gold band, picked out by James Walker, the man who had loved her with quiet devotion for nearly 3 years. He had proposed last winter under the glow of the street lamp outside her parents' home in Michigan. His hands were shaking, his eyes full of hope. But Madison, with tears in her eyes, had said no. Not because she didn't love him, because, in many ways, she did. James was steady, kind, the kind of man any woman would be lucky to have. But something inside her had held back, unsure if she was ready for forever. Unsure if what they had was enough to build a life on. Now, months later, the ring still sat in that drawer, untouched but never forgotten. Madison had tried to move forward, bury herself in work, go on with her routines, pretend her heart wasn't stuck between past and future. But the truth is, she felt hollow, empty in places that used to feel warm. The silence between her and James had stretched long and wide, like a quiet road that neither of them had the courage to walk anymore. Still, she thought of him often, his hand resting gently on her back when they crossed a street. The way he always brought her tea when she had a cold, how he'd watch her when she was reading like she was the most beautiful sentence in the room. But that night something shifted. Madison couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way the rain hit the window, or how the city lights shimmered in the puddles outside. All she knew was that her chest felt too tight, her thoughts too loud. She stood, walked to the dresser, and opened the drawer slowly, as if afraid the ring might speak. There it was, still beautiful, still waiting. She picked it up, held it in her palm, and closed her fingers around it. For a moment, she just breathed. Then, almost without thinking, she slipped on her coat, left her apartment, and stepped into the night. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay still any longer. Sometimes people say love is simple, either you feel it or you don't. But for Madison, love was layered. It was the memory of James's warmth, mixed with the fear of giving too much and losing herself. It was the pull of a life that looked perfect on paper, but somehow felt incomplete. As she walked through the quiet streets of Lakeview, her thoughts swirled like the wind. Maybe she had been wrong to push him away. Or maybe she hadn't truly understood what she needed until now. One love should have been enough. But tonight, her heart whispered that maybe she had more questions than answers. Maybe she had more space to fill inside than one ring or one man. Holed out and across the city, in his quiet apartment, James Walker picked up his phone. Her name sat at the top of his favorites list, untouched. He hesitated. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then, finally, he pressed call. Madison's phone buzzed in her coat pocket, just as she reached the corner where it had all once begun. Would she answer? Or was this the beginning of something neither of them saw coming? The smell of fresh rain followed Madison as she stepped into the quiet little cafe on the corner of Lakeview Avenue, the one she hadn't visited since everything with James began to unravel. The lights inside were soft and golden, casting a gentle glow on the wooden tables and fogged-up windows. This place held stories. It was here 2 winters ago that she and James had shared their first real conversation to strangers warming, their hands on coffee cups, talking about life, music, and how hard it is to be vulnerable when the world expects you to always look like you've got it all together. Tonight, though, the place felt different, empty but comforting, familiar, but somehow distant. When the barista Claire smiled at her and asked if she wanted her usual, Madison hesitated. "Surprise me tonight," she said with a tired smile, her voice softer than she expected. She wasn't sure what she needed, but she knew it wasn't the same old thing. She took a seat by the window, watching people pass with umbrellas and hurried steps. Her mind was still spinning with the weight of the ring, of James's missed calls, of the version of herself she used to be, the one who once believed love should be simple. She wasn't expecting company, so when she heard the familiar voice say her name, she turned slowly, almost afraid that memory had finally caught up with her. But it wasn't memory. It was Ethan Price. She blinked, stunned. He looked the same, maybe a little older, a little calmer, but still had that easy charm in his smile, the kind that once made her forget about time. Ethan had been a chapter of her life she'd tucked away. He had moved to Seattle 3 years ago after a whirlwind romance that had burned too fast and ended too suddenly. Madison remembered the nights they had danced barefoot in her kitchen. The way he spoke poetry without meaning to. The way he left just as quickly as he came, leaving her heart aching with what ifs. And now here he was, standing in front of her like no time had passed. "Madison," he said again, softer this time, as if saying her name might break the air between them. She nodded, motioning for him to sit, and just like that, they were. Two old flames sharing a table, as though the years hadn't happened. They talked slowly at first, carefully, their words circling the silence like dancers afraid to step too close. He told her about Seattle, his job, how he'd come back to visit his sister. She told him about her writing, her family, the quiet sadness that had crept into her nights since James's proposal. She didn't mention the ring. She didn't have to. Ethan saw it in her eyes, the way she kept looking out the window, as if searching for something just beyond reach. And as they talked, Madison felt something stir. Not a longing for Ethan, not exactly, but a longing for the version of herself. She had been with him, bold, open, unafraid of taking chances. She had forgotten what that felt like. With James, everything was safe. With Ethan, it had been chaos, but it had been alive. When Ethan stood to leave, he looked at her like he might say something more. But he didn't, just smiled that same quiet smile, touched her hand briefly, and walked into the night without asking for anything. Madison sat there, her coffee gone cold, her heart strangely full and empty all at once. That night, she had gone looking for answers and, instead, she found herself caught between two different kinds of love, one grounded, one wild, and for the first time in a long time, she realized, maybe one wasn't enough. Not when your heart is still learning what it truly wants. James sat in the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by shadows and silence, the kind that creeps in when someone you love starts feeling like a stranger. He had replayed the same moment in his head for weeks. Madison standing in front of him, eyes full of emotion, saying no when he asked her to be his forever. She had held his hands tightly that day, almost as if she didn't want to let go, but her voice had trembled with a truth he wasn't ready to hear. Now, all he had was time and a growing ache in his chest that no routine or distraction could ease. He glanced at the photo of them on the shelf, taken at her sister's wedding in Vermont. Madison had looked radiant, laughing with her eyes closed, leaning into him like home. But lately, even her memory felt distant. Still, her name remained at the top of his favorites list on his phone, untouched. He'd hovered over it so many times, his thumb pausing, his heart unsure. But tonight, something told him to call. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was the quiet voice inside him that still believed in her. He hit call. Madison answered on the third ring, her voice softer than he remembered. "James," she breathed like she hadn't expected to hear from him, and before he could speak, she said, "I know I've been distant, but tonight something changed." Her words made him sit straighter, alert but cautious. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern lacing every syllable. She hesitated, then said something he didn't expect. "I saw Ethan tonight." The name fell between them like a sudden gust of wind, cold and unexpected. James knew about Ethan. Not the full story, just enough to know that he had been someone important before James ever came into her life. He didn't speak right away. He let her fill the space. "It wasn't planned," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I didn't go looking for him. But seeing him, it brought up things I didn't know I still carried. Not just about him, but about me." James felt a twinge in his chest, something between jealousy and fear, but he listened. Madison had always been thoughtful, careful with her words. But tonight there was rawness in her voice that felt new. "I realized I've been trying to force love into a shape I thought it should be. And I've been holding on to this idea that once I choose someone, that's it, everything gets easy. But that's not real, is it?" James sighed, looking out the window at the rain. "No, it's not." She paused again. "You've always been good to me. Gentle, patient, You loved me in a way that felt safe, and I think I needed that. But I also think I was afraid to let you see the parts of me that still needed work, that still needed healing. There it was, the truth. Honest, brave, messy. James closed his eyes for a moment. Do you love him? He asked, even though it hurt to say. Madison was quiet for a long time. Then, I loved who I was with him. But I'm not that person anymore. Her voice steadied. With you, I've felt real love. But I need to come to you as someone whole, not someone hiding behind fear. His throat tightened, but there was no anger, only longing. So, what happens now? He asked gently. Madison whispered, I don't know. But I want to find out. If you'll let me. And though the space between them hadn't yet closed, something important had shifted. Because sometimes love isn't just about choosing someone, it's about choosing to become someone worthy of the love you want to give. And that night, beneath the sound of rain, James knew their story wasn't over. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Madison let herself slow down, really slow down for the first time in years. She stopped running from the stillness that had once made her feel afraid, and instead leaned into it. Every morning she brewed her coffee in silence, watched the light move across her apartment walls, and began writing again, something she hadn't done since before James. Not for work, not for anyone else, just for herself. The city moved on around her, busy and loud, but Madison stayed quiet on purpose. She wasn't trying to forget James or Ethan. She wasn't trying to fix anything overnight. She was trying to understand what she truly wanted, who she really was. And in doing that, she realized something deep, something that had always lived inside her, just waiting to be named. She had believed for so long that love would save her, fill the spaces that felt empty, prove she was enough. But real love was never supposed to be a rescue. It was supposed to be a partnership. A meeting of two whole people who choose each other, not out of fear, but from freedom. She spent more time at the cafe in Lakeview. Claire, the gentle barista with warm eyes and a kind smile, became an unexpected friend. One rainy afternoon, Madison told her everything about James, about Ethan, about the night her heart cracked open and she realized she was still healing in places she hadn't looked at in years. Claire listened without judgment, just nodding. As Madison spoke, and when she finally fell quiet, Claire reached across the table and said, Love doesn't fix what we won't face. But once you face it, the right kind of love will walk beside you. That's all it needs to do. Those words stayed with Madison. She carried them through the days that followed, like a soft light in the corners of her mind. And when she was ready, truly ready, she wrote 2 letters. To Ethan, she poured out a quiet kind of gratitude. She thanked him for reminding her of the girl she used to be, of the spark she'd once carried before life dimmed it with fear and expectations. She didn't ask for anything from him. No future, no reunion, just closure, peace. And then she wrote to James. That letter took longer. There were pauses, rewrites, tears, because this one mattered. I don't come to you from a place of needing to be saved, she wrote. I come to you now as someone who has taken the time to meet herself, and I want you to meet that woman, if you still want to. That summer, on a warm Sunday afternoon, James and Madison met at the park near the lake. There was no pressure, no ring in his pocket. Just 2 people walking slowly, side by side, letting their fingers brush now and then. It was simple, honest, real. They didn't talk about timelines or labels. They just laughed a little, shared stories they hadn't yet told, and paused often to listen to the breeze through the trees. And in those quiet moments, Madison realized something powerful. Love wasn't about choosing once and sticking with it no matter what. It was about choosing again and again, choosing growth, choosing truth, choosing each other with open eyes and open hearts. She had once thought one love would be enough to carry her through life, but now she understood. She didn't need just love, she needed the kind of love that let her grow, that let her fall and rise and become. And this time, she wasn't asking for forever. She was asking for real. And James, with a soft smile and steady hand, was ready to begin again, not with the woman he once proposed to, but with the woman who had finally come home to herself.